So my name is Aaron. That's my name, Aaron. But if I have to give my name at a restaurant or like a Starbucks, I always give a fake name. I always say Doug. I don't know if I look like a Doug. That's not even why I do it. I say Aaron wrong, I think. I have to repeat Aaron every time. Every time I say Aaron, they're like, Eric? It never happens with Doug. I'm batting 1,000 with Doug, man. I've said Doug 1,000,000 times. They're never like Trug, so it's the only name that sounds like Doug. I was at a sandwich shop in Iowa not long ago. The cashier is very friendly. She goes, "Can I get a name for your order?" I don't even think anymore. That's how often I lie. I go, "Yeah, my name's Doug." She was like, "Oh, you have an accent. Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from Alabama," which is true. I grew up in Alabama. I've lived in Tennessee for 15 years now, but she didn't ask for my whole life story. So I'll just give her the bullet points, right? I'm Doug from Alabama. That's who I am in this sandwich shop. So we start chatting, and listen, I'm married. We weren't flirting. There was friendship in the air. Do you know what I mean? I was killing it, to be honest with you. You ever bond with a stranger you'll never see ever again in your life? It's fun. We talked about life and love and happiness. We connected, right? So I get to the end. She's made my sandwich, and she goes, "Hey, Doug, I enjoyed chatting with you today." And I was like, "Wow, I enjoyed chatting with you." She goes, "Whenever you're ready, it's $9.18. I said, "Great." I pull out my credit card. Apparently yours works the same way mine does. It has my legal name on the front, which is not Doug, it's Aaron Weber. She goes, "Well, you told me your name was Doug." I go, "Well, it's my middle name. And I just go by Doug, but my middle name's Doug." She was like, "Your middle name's Doug? Your card says Aaron J. Weber on it." I was like, "Oh yeah, my mom spelled it wrong on the birth certificate, We are from Alabama, We can't spell down there. I'm J-Doug, technically. That's what my family calls me. I won't tell you the whole story, but I'm J-Doug. She was like, "Okay, J-Doug, do you have an ID on you with the same name as this? I can't just swipe this card with a different name. Do you have an ID?" "Oh, yeah, I got you." I take out my driver's license, which I realize is a Tennessee driver's license. I mean, my entire life story collapsed in 5 seconds. I'm a totally different person. When I walked in, I was Doug from Alabama, right? Now I'm Aaron from Tennessee, a pathological liar.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, Management Wednesday, July the 3rd, and this is The True Conservative. And by the way, tomorrow, Independence Day, I will have a special Independence Day podcast. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and management of the absurd. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now the headlines.
Ash, take it away.
Hey, good morning, Cheryl. Thank you very much. And good morning, everybody. Boy, what so much to talk about. Democrats now breaking ranks with President Biden just months before the election day. 25 House Democrats preparing to call on Biden to end his re-election campaign. This comes as two Democrat congressmen, Lloyd Doggett and Jared Golden, publicly declare they have no confidence in Biden's ability to win and serve another term. Well, the press also seems to be turning. Reporters question White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre about the president's mental fitness for nearly an hour yesterday. The White House claims, hey, the president just had a bad night and, oh yeah, he had a cold as well. Meanwhile, Biden telling donors he almost fell asleep at the debate. He blamed his travel schedule, even though all of that was weeks earlier. This Friday, President Biden will sit for his first interview since that disastrous performance. And by the way, President Biden is also going to meet with governors who are gathering at the White House today. It's all part of an aggressive campaign to try and salvage the president's re-election bid. The White House also confirming, by the way, in the middle of all of this, Hunter Biden has been sitting in on these meetings. Great. All right, let's take a look at the markets. As Cheryl mentioned, it's a shortened trading day. The market's closing at 1 p.m. Eastern today, but in the pre-market, all of the major indices, the Dow, the S&P, and the NASDAQ, all showing just slightly lower. Let's take a look at the 10-year yield. That, too, was moving slightly lower, down about 2 basis points at 4.4%. The 2-year, let's take a look at the 2-year yield. That, too, I believe, was moving just a little higher, up by a basis point of 4.75. And Bitcoin, that was moving lower. At least it was the last time I looked. Bitcoin, down about $2,000 at 59,890, under 60,000. All right, on the show today, Donald Trump's sentencing in his New York case has been delayed until September. All of this in the wake of the Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity. We also have a new CNN poll conducted in the wake of the debate that shows Trump with a roughly 20-point lead over Biden on the economy and immigration. And speaking of economy, firing up the grill for the 4th of July has gotten a lot pricier under President Biden, from burgers to buns, potato salad to ice cream. It's all going to cost you a lot more this year. Did you hear that, Janet Yellen? Well, we've got the grill going, and we're going to take a look at how much costlier those holiday cookouts have gotten. It is Wednesday, July the 3rd, 2024. Varney and Company, about to begin.
And that was the headlines. Back in a minute. Thank you. Who is the true conservative? The true conservative is the person that has the courage of their convictions. That means that they know that conservatism is best. Best for them, best for their family, best for their community, best for their city, their state, the country, and the world at large. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the military shorts.
In the early morning hours of June 6, 1944, 20-year-old Private Robert Hillman did a final inspection of his gear as the C-47 he was aboard neared the drop zone. Hillman quietly chuckled to himself when he saw that the parachute was made at the Pioneer Parachute Company, located just miles from his family home in Manchester, Connecticut. Seconds later, he let out an audible guffaw, drawing attention from the stoic and surely nervous jumpers around him. "What gives?" an agitated voice rang out. Still in disbelief from what he had just seen, an incredulous Hillman simply responded, "I know my chute is going to work." "How do you know that?" a second skeptical voice responded. "Because my mother works for the Pioneer Parachute Company, and her initials are on my chute." It may be the most remarkable coincidence on one of the most remarkable days in history, or was it something more? Hillman's chute worked. He survived the war and brought home a sliver of the parachute to show his mother.
When we hit the lines, we had a tank attack, real early. We were out in an open field, pinned down from artillery fire. And usually after artillery fire, tanks come and finish you off. But here's what happened. We were told to get dug in deep as we could. The tanks came, and we had bazookas, and we had armor-piercing shells, and we did the best we could, even though we lost men in every battle. It seemed like we had green troops coming in as the dead were taken out. But the German fighter was nobody to fool with. He was a deadly fighter.
By the time the Spitfire comes into service, it's equipped with 8 303 machine guns, 4 in each wing. Because the British fighters were equipped with 8 machine guns, they had a higher rate of fire, meaning they could fire more bullets at the enemy in a certain span of time. However, the differing range of weapons the Germans had meant they had a higher weight of fire, meaning that they could put down an increased volume of ordnance over their British counterparts. So it's clear that this is all about balance. What is the right combination to use? And it was something that was debated heavily at the time on both sides of the opposing forces, and is still debated, often with much controversy to this day.
He had enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1940 and was assigned to a metallurgy shop in Chicago. But hours after Pearl Harbor, he requested a transfer to combat. His name was Ted Cummings, and he became a gunnery specialist with the 1st Marine Raider Battalion, Edson's Raiders. He was among the first wave of Marines to storm the beaches of Tulagi in August of 1942, a heavily fortified speck of rock 20 miles north of Guadalcanal. After 48 hours of brutal combat, Cummings and 8 Marines found refuge in what remained of the governor's palace. Cummings was catatonic from fear and exhaustion, on the verge of collapse, barely able to function. Somehow, a piano was still standing among the rubble, and then he heard it. A Marine began playing the very last song that Cummings heard as he said his goodbyes to his parents years earlier. At that moment, I knew I would make it through the war, he would recall on his 90th birthday in 2014. It was as if they were reaching out to me through that song.
NATO is developing multiple land corridors to rush U.S. troops and armor to the front lines in the event of a war with Russia. Right, American troops would land at one of 5 ports and be moved along a pre-planned logistical route to confront Russia. With the current plan being to have U.S. troops shipped to Rotterdam and then take a train through Germany into Poland. But they're making other arrangements now, fearing that Russia could bombard the Dutch ports. And so the other routes involve landing in Italy, Greece, Turkey, Norway, and the Balkans. Meanwhile, France has been complaining about the bureaucracy involved in deploying troops across the continent, so these new corridors would remove local regulation and allow countries to rush their troops to the border. NATO's also reformatting their logistics because having huge logistic bases like they did in Afghanistan and Iraq is no longer possible because they're sitting targets against Russian missile attacks. And this coming as Norway's top general says NATO has 2 to 3 years to prepare for war with Russia.
And that was the military shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of motivation.
Spartans! What is your profession?
As Philip II of Macedon was conquering Greek city-states left and right, Sparta was left alone. Philip had achieved a crushing victory, and Sparta was relatively weak and without walls. Philip sent a message to the Spartans saying, "If I invade Laconia, you will be destroyed, never to rise again." The Spartans replied with one word, "If." When someone asked why they visited disgrace upon those among them who lost their shields, but did not do the same thing to those who lost their helmets or their breastplates, the Spartan king Demaratus is said to have replied, "Because the latter they put on for their own protection, but the shield for the common good of the whole line." Feel no fear before the multitude of men. Do not run in panic, but let each man bear his shield straight towards the 4 fighters, regarding his own life as hateful, and holding the dark spirits of death as dear as the radiance of the sun. Xerxes wrote to him, "It is possible for you not by fighting against God, but by ranging yourself to my side, to be the sole ruler of Greece." But he wrote in reply, "If you had any knowledge of the noble things in life, you would refrain from coveting others' possessions. But for me to die for Greece is better than to be the sole ruler over the people of my race." When Xerxes wrote again, "Hand over your arms," he wrote in reply, "Come and take them." Herodotus reports that just before the Battle of Thermopylae, a Spartan warrior named Dieneces was told that the Persian archers could blank out the sun with their arrows. He replied, "Good, then we shall have our battle in the shade." It was natural for Spartan women to think and speak as Gorgo, the wife of Leonidas, is said to have done. When some foreign lady, as it would seem, told her that the women of Lacedaemon were the only women of the world who could rule men, with good reason, she said, "For we are the only women who bring forth men." An old man wandering around the Olympic Games looking for a seat was jeered at by the crowd until he reached the seat of the Spartans, whereupon every Spartan younger than him, and some that were older, stood up and offered him their seat. The crowd applauded, and the old man turned to them with a sigh, saying, "All Greeks know what is right, but only the Spartans do it." Let a man learn how to fight by first daring to perform mighty deeds, not where the missiles won't reach if he is armed with a shield, but getting in close where the fighting is hand to hand, inflicting a wound with his long spear or sword, taking the enemy's life, with his foot planted alongside a foot, and his shield pressed against shield, and his crest up against crest, and his helm against helm, and his breast against breast, embroiled in the action. Let him fight man to man, holding secure in his grasp haft of his sword or spear. Rise up, warriors. Take your stand at one another's sides, our feet set wide and rooted like oaks in the ground. Learn to love death's inky black shadow as much as you love the light of dawn. Here is courage, mankind's finest possession. Here is the noblest prize that a young man can endeavor to win. The Spartans are the equal of any men when they fight as individuals. Fighting together as a collective, they surpass all other men. Bias, caught in an ambush by Iphicrates, the Athenian general, and asked by his soldiers what was to be done, said, "What else except for you to save your lives, and for me to die fighting?" The walls of Sparta were its young men, and its borders the points of their spears. In answer to the man who sought to know why the Spartans use short daggers in war, Antalcidas said, "Because we fight close to the enemy." For the Spartans, it wasn't walls or magnificent public buildings that made a city. It was their own ideas. In essence, Sparta was a city of the head and the heart, and it existed in its purest form in the disciplined march of the hoplite phalanx on their way to war.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Daily Stoic.
If you want to be steady, The essence of good is a certain kind of reasoned choice, just as the essence of evil is another kind. What about externals, then? They are only the raw material for our reasoned choice, which finds its own good or evil in working with them. How will it find the good? Not by marveling at the material. For if judgments about the material are straight, that makes our choices good. But if those judgments are twisted, our choices turn bad. Epictetus, Discourses 1.29.1 through 3. The Stoics seek steadiness, stability, and tranquility, traits most of us aspire to, but seem to experience only fleetingly. How do they accomplish this elusive goal? How does one embody eustatheia, the word Arrian used to describe this teaching of Epictetus? Well, it's not luck. It's not by eliminating outside influences or running away to quiet and solitude. Instead, it's about filtering the outside world through the straightener of our judgment. That's what our reason can do. It can take the crooked, confusing, and overwhelming nature of external events and make them orderly. However, if our judgments are crooked because we don't use reason, then everything that follows will be crooked, and we will lose our ability to steady ourselves in the chaos and rush of life. If you want to be steady, if you want clarity, proper judgment is the best way.
And that was the Daily Stoic. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Bishop Robert Barron.
Everything around me, whatever exists, is already the gift of God. That's what creation means. God is the one who brought the whole of finitude into being. This world is not just dumbly there. It's there as a result of God's initiative, of God's grace. More to it, everything in me. So I'm seeking God with my mind and my will and my passions and so on. Well, where did my mind and will and passions come from? It's not like I just happen to have them and now God's out there and boy, I'm going to make my way to impress God. No, I'm the contrary. My mind, my will, my energy, my passion, everything in me is always already the gift of God.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, to proclaim that any extreme is evil because it is an extreme, to hold the degree of a characteristic, regardless of its nature, as evil, is an absurdity. Measurements as such have no value, significance, and acquire it only from the nature of that which is being measured. Unquote. Ayn Rand. The Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the 33 strategies of war.
Reversal. Should you see or suspect that you yourself are being attacked bite by bite, your only counter-strategy is to prevent any further progress or fait accompli. A quick and forceful response will usually be enough to discourage the nibblers, who often resort to this strategy out of weakness and cannot afford many battles. If they are tougher and more ambitious, like Frederick the Great, that forceful response becomes more crucial still. Letting them get away with their bites, however small, is too dangerous. Nip them in the bud.
And that was the 33 strategies of war. Back in a minute. Thank you. If you're a Democrat, you should vote Republican because aggression against others reverses into aggression against the self. The more a person contains aggression against others, the more strict and coercive the conscience becomes. The internalization of violence also proves useful to the exercise of rule. It ensures that the obedient subject internalizes the external ruling authority, making it a part of itself. This allows the authority to rule with far less effort. Symbolic violence is also a violence that makes use of the mechanism of habit. It inscribes itself within the things that are taken for granted, in habitual patterns of perception and of behavior. Violence is naturalized, as it were. Without the effort of physical, martial violence, it ensures that the established ruling relationship is maintained. The psychological internalization of force also serves disciplinary ends. By way of subtle, discrete interventions, it infiltrates the subject's neural paths and muscle fibers, subjugating it to outside ortho and neurocorrective compulsions and imperatives. The wholesale violence of decapitation, which prevails in the society of sovereignty, yields to the violence of successive subcutaneous deformation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, from the book Speechless by Michael Knowles, Chapter 5, Mao Goes Mainstream.
Chapter 5, Mao Goes Mainstream. Political correctness, ironically, is neither correct nor strictly political, and its conception of the good is evil. But almost from the beginning, irony has defined political correctness, inasmuch as it transforms words and phrases to make them mean their opposite. The term first entered the American lexicon through the Supreme Court's 1793 decision in Chisholm v. Georgia. Chief Justice John Marshall, referring to sentiments and expressions of an inaccurate kind, wonders, is a toast asked? The United States, instead of the people of the United States, is the toast given. This is not politically correct. Marshall meant the phrase sincerely. The toast got the political order of the country wrong. This initial deployment of politically correct bears little, if any, relation to the phrase's current use. The relevant sense of the term did not appear for nearly a century and a half after Marshall's coinage. In 1935, the American writer and critic Joseph Wood Crutch accused liberal-turned-radical professors at Columbia University of disregarding the importance of free discussion and instead indoctrinating students in allegedly correct opinions. Ralph Ellison's 1952 novel Invisible Man, set in the 1930s, uses the concept of correctness in the same sardonic way. In my opinion, the speech was wild, hysterical, politically irresponsible, and dangerous. And worse than that, it was incorrect, declaims a member of the politically radical brotherhood. Ellison emphasizes this last term. He pronounced incorrect as though the term described the most heinous crime imaginable, and I stared at him open-mouthed, feeling a vague guilt. By the 1930s, the fanatical insistence on correctness in politics had begun to take hold. Vladimir Nabokov introduced the phrase politically incorrect in its present meaning in his 1947 novel Bend Sinister, about an imaginary totalitarian regime. Some organizations used to be pretty bad and are forbidden today, reports the state-controlled press. But nevertheless, it is better for a man to have belonged to a politically incorrect organization than not to have belonged to any organization at all. Nabokov meant politically incorrect as we mean it today, that is, deviating from party orthodoxy. 6 years after the Russian Nabokov invoked the term, it made its way into Eastern European literature through Czesław Miłosz, who used the Polish phrase poprawna polityczna, which his translator, Jane Zielonko, rendered literally as politically correct in his novel The Captive Mind. Still, a politically correct theme would not have saved him from the critics' attack had they wanted to apply orthodox criteria, writes Miłosz in Zielonko's translation, because he described the concentration camp as he personally had seen it, not as one was supposed to see it. The author recognized a chasm between political correctness and reality. All of these prophets of political correctness, from Orwell and Huxley to Nabokov and Miłosz, understood the power of language to shape politics. If thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought, wrote Orwell in his essay Politics in the English Language, which examines the relationship between linguistic perversion and political orthodoxy. A bad usage can spread by tradition and imitation even among people who should and do know better. Political correctness has succeeded because even its opponents fall victim to its allure. Antifa, a left-wing terror group that rose to prominence in the United States during the Trump administration, exemplifies this relationship between word and deed. Antifa, short for anti-fascist, perpetrates violence against mainstream conservative civilians and police officers to achieve its radical leftist political ends. Antifa members train in advanced battle tactics, don black uniforms, and arm themselves with knives, brass knuckles, bricks, high-powered lasers, and other weapons. They target not fascists, but conservatives. The simple possession of a Make America Great Again hat suffices to get one labeled a fascist by Antifa. Noting the similarities in tactics and even uniform between Mussolini's black shirts and Antifa's street warriors, many conservatives reveled in the irony. The so-called anti-fascists, they argued, were actually fascists. But they aren't fascists, and conservatives giggling to the contrary demonstrates the PC trap. Some Antifa members are anarchists, others are communists. All are very bad fellows. But they are not fascists. By describing them as such, conservatives have accepted the radicals' premise that fascism uniquely threatens the peace and body politic. As Orwell observes, the word fascism has now no meaning except insofar as it signifies something not desirable. And that is precisely how the radicals want it. Fascism once had a narrower definition. Benito Mussolini, the founder of fascism, defined the term with the help of the philosopher Giovanni Gentile in 1832. Fascism, according to Mussolini and Gentile, rejects individualism, economic liberalism, egalitarianism, pacifism, Christianity, and Marxian socialism. It supports one entity above all others, the state. The keystone of the fascist doctrine is its conception of the state, of its essence, its functions, and its aims. For fascism, the state is absolute, individuals and groups relative. Individuals and groups are admissible insofar as they come within the state. Instead of directing the game and guiding the material and moral progress of the community, the liberal state restricts its activities to recording results. The fascist state is wide awake and has a will of its own. For this reason, it can be described as ethical. Neither conservatives nor leftists in the 21st century meet the definition of fascism, which is an ideology unto itself. Yet the left flings the term at the right, and the right foolishly hurls it right back at the left, accepting fascism as the ultimate political evil, the very premise leftists sought to establish in the first place. Both sides excitedly condemn fascism, a phantom villain that died with Mussolini on the streets of Milan. Meanwhile, the extant evil of Marxian socialism, openly embraced by the left's most influential activist groups and vast swaths of the Democrat Party, gets off the hook and spreads. Political correctness thrives by turning opponents into unwitting supporters. It exhibits what the essayist Nassim Nicholas Taleb calls anti-fragility, the quality of not merely resisting, but actually becoming stronger through shock and challenge. The more we argue against it, the more we accept its terms, its very substance, into our language, thought, and culture. The fight against bad English is not frivolous and is not the exclusive concern of professional writers, warned Orwell. We may resist political correctness and the radical ideology it carries, but effective resistance requires that we know what we are saying. You are not obliged to go to all this trouble, Orwell admits. You can shirk it by simply throwing your mind open and letting the ready-made phrases come crowding in. They will construct your sentences for you, even think your thoughts for you. And at need, they will perfect the important service of partially concealing your meaning, even from yourself. Political correctness transcends political parties and movements. It transforms the entire culture, and careless conservatives abet its advance just as much as the radicals who celebrate it. Politically correct language infects the mind like a virus and spreads like a pandemic, so contagious, in fact, that its origins can be traced all the way across the world to China. Among the many plagues that China has unleashed upon the world, from the Black Death in the 14th century to the Wuhan virus in the 21st, None has so crippled Western society as the idea of political correctness, which first entered radical circles through the translation into English of quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong, better known as Mao's Little Red Book, in 1966. Neither the phrase political correctness nor any of its derivations appears in the famous Communist Tract. But the word correct appears 110 times. The translators preferred correct to right, which they rarely used in the sense of justified or acceptable, perhaps for fear of associating rightness with the right. Whatever the reason, the odd and persistent use of correct caught the attention of Western radicals, who adopted the phrase and the ideology it described. Ruth Perry, a leftist professor and founder of MIT's Women's Studies program, credits the term to Mao in her essay, A Short History of the Term Politically Correct. Barbara Epstein, founding co-editor of the New York Review of Books, suggests the additional influence of correct lineism, a Communist Party term, on the radicals who embraced political correctness. Though historians of the movement continue to debate the precise details of its spread, all agree that foreign communists bequeathed the notion to Western radicals who popularized it. Chairman Mao, like Antonio Gramsci and the intellectuals of the Frankfurt School, understood that cultural upheaval must precede political revolution. In the world today, all culture, all literature and art belong to definite classes and are geared to definite political lines, he declared in the Little Red Book. There is in fact no such thing as art for art's sake, art that stands above classes, art that is detached from or independent of politics. Mao's cynical and exploitative view of art may explain why his regime never produced a Michelangelo. But his understanding of politics helps to explain politically correct radicals' success in spreading their worldview and conservatives' incompetence at stopping it. Many conservatives will recoil at the suggestion that all art and culture must be political, as Mao and his followers in the West declared. Do the paintings of Caravaggio or Rembrandt not delight leftists as well as conservatives? Can one not enjoy the poetry of Dante or Shakespeare without sharing the political perspective of the poets themselves? Unless a present-day reader harbors some particularly strong attachment to the Ghibelline faction of 14th century Florence, one struggles even to imagine how Dante's partisan views could affect appreciation of his poem. Mao's theory of art rankles conservatives because they hold a narrower view of politics than their radical opponents. While conservatives tend to cherish some separation between public and private life as necessary to self-government, the radicals recognize no such distinction. For them, the personal is the political. Precisely because separation between public and private life is necessary for Republican government, the revolutionaries must abolish this separation to further their revolution. The radicals have a point. Politics in its most basic sense does not refer merely to the government or the various bureaucratic entities that govern us, as right-wing ideologues often assume. Politics more broadly means how we all get along together. It derives from the ancient Greek word polis, which refers to the entire city-state. Conservatives may prefer a broad private sphere, but such a private realm cannot exist without the support of a stable public sphere in which citizens broadly agree on the premises of the state. In other words, the separation between public and private life requires some measure of political consensus. Republicans and Democrats of yesteryear may have disagreed, for example, on immigration policy, but they agreed that citizens have the right to determine who enters their country. The two parties may have disagreed on tax rates and trade deals, but both accepted the legitimacy of protecting property. They may have favored different aspects of the national identity, but both stood for the Star-Spangled Banner. Mao's radical admirers sought and continue to seek the collapse of even those basic points of agreement. The distinction between past and present holds the key to the communist leader's theory of art. He did not state as an eternal truth that all culture, all literature, and art belong to definite classes and are geared to definite political lines. Rather, Mao grounded that assertion in the world today. In the past, art may not have conformed to the contours of ideology. But Mao's revolution transformed all that. Politics, art, and everything else. Now nothing can escape ideology. The ruthless criticism of all that exists spares no edifice. Mao described the revolutionary's purpose as ensuring that literature and art fit well into the whole revolutionary machine as a component part, that they operate as powerful weapons for uniting and educating the people, and for attacking and destroying the enemy. A partial revolution would be no revolution at all. On the contrary, it would accept the very liberal premises the radicals sought to overturn. Totalitarian revolutions must be achieved in total. Not so much as a painting or piece of music may be permitted to escape their influence. The radicals' cultural revolution progressed as Mao predicted it would. He described his revolution as a long march, at once a manifesto, a propaganda force, and a seeding machine that would sow many seeds which will sprout, leaf, blossom, and bear fruit, and will yield a harvest in the future. The seeds planted in the early and mid-20th century have borne fruit, and conservatives took notice only after radicals had infiltrated every cultural institution. Political correctness has advanced not in a short burst of advocacy, but rather in Deutschke's long march through the institutions. Deutschke, who read Gramsci's ideology through Mao's tactics, shaped a generation of leftist activists. A German student interpreting Italian and Chinese admirers of a German philosopher inspired a generation of American radicals. And yet casual observers of political correctness may scoff at the very notion that one can trace the movement back more than 2 or 3 decades. Many leftists deny political correctness altogether. Political correctness, how the right invented a phantom enemy, reads one representative headline from the left-wing British newspaper, The Guardian, in 2016. The truth about political correctness is that it doesn't actually exist, insists Vox. Countless other outlets parrot the same line. 4 in 5 Americans may consider political correctness a national problem, but according to left-wing journalists, they fear an illusion. The phrase cultural Marxism elicits not merely denial, but invective, as in Wikipedia's assertion that cultural Marxism is a far-right, anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. But political correctness does exist. Its most prominent advocates have described themselves as cultural Marxists, and its origins can be traced all the way back to Karl Marx himself, as we have discussed. Why and how would reasonable people deny these plain facts? The answer lies in the essentially deceptive nature of translation. Traduttore traditore, goes an Italian idiom, which translates to translator, traitor, though it sounds better in the original, proving the point. The expression captures the ultimate impossibility of translation. No matter how skillful the translator, any translation from one language into another transforms the text, because the source and target languages differ in sound and culture. A Russian can get the gist of Shakespeare in translation. A Brit can get the gist of Dante. But a translation must always betray some aspect of the original, because no 2 languages and no 2 cultures are identical. Political correctness is itself a process of translation, betraying culture through language that reorders the culture's standards. As we have seen, politically correct wordsmiths pretend that the term justice-involved person is a synonym for criminal. Both terms refer to the same people, that is, people caught committing crimes, but they imply entirely different moral frameworks. The translation distorts and betrays the original meaning. Language changes naturally over time, but the shift from criminal to justice-involved person did not come about through natural linguistic development. Rather, leftist academics, political activists, and bureaucrats contrived the new term, and left-wing journalists parroted it. The 2 terms reflect 2 different cultures, one in which people have moral agency, another in which they do not. Criminals break the law and deserve punishment. Justice-involved persons are passive characters. If active at all, they sound as though they pursue justice, and only a cruel society would punish someone for pursuing justice. If culture worked precisely as the radicals would have it, this process of translation would remake the world, and that would be the end of it. But while new jargon may shift attitudes for a time, a countervailing force cuts against it, the euphemism treadmill. Harvard psychologist Steven Pinker identified and named this concept in his 2003 book, The Blank Slate. Linguists are familiar with the phenomenon, which may be called the euphemism treadmill, Pinker wrote. People invent new words for emotionally charged reference, but soon the euphemism becomes tainted by association, and a new word must be found, which soon acquires its own connotations, and so on. A pretty word can conceal a harsh fact for only so long. Eventually, the harshness of the reality will pollute the beauty of the word. The simplest example of the euphemism treadmill may be simpleton, an offensive word by today's standards that was introduced into public discourse in 1846 by S.G. Howe, a well-intentioned physician who meant no disrespect. 2 years after coining simpleton, Dr. Howe founded the Massachusetts School for Idiotic and Feeble-Minded Youth, not to be confused with nearby Harvard. Feeble-minded, from the Latin flebilis, lamentable, was not an insult, but rather a clinical descriptor for slow folk. When society deemed those terms too harsh, scientists replaced them with moron, coined by psychologist Henry Goddard from the Greek word moros, dull. Other euphemisms, such as retarded, from the Latin for slow, and imbecile, weak, in turn replaced moron and idiot, and the process continues. No matter which term society chooses, the word inevitably attains a negative connotation because it refers to a condition that most people consider lamentable. The euphemism treadmill, Pinker explains, shows that concepts, not words, are primary in people's minds. Give a concept a new name, and the name becomes colored by the concept. The concept does not become freshened by the name, at least not for long. Pinker contends that reality reasserts itself in the end, which offers some consolation to conservatives. But does he place too much faith in the inevitable triumph of reason in human affairs? Concepts may weigh more heavily in people's minds over time, but they cannot be dispositive. New jargon may be colored over time by the concept to which it refers, but it does not therefore follow that the concept derives no long-term benefit from the euphemism. Consider, for example, the history of sodomy laws. The term sodomite conjures images of fire and brimstone from the book of Genesis, while the word homosexual elicits no such reaction. For most of American history, sodomy has been illegal, though rarely prosecuted. In 1986, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of sodomy laws in Bowers v. Hardwick. Only in 2003, in Lawrence v. Texas, did the court discover a theretofore hidden provision of the Constitution guaranteeing the right to those sexual acts, and it abolished by judicial fiat sodomy laws in the 14 states that still maintained them. One may applaud the demise of sodomy laws while lamenting the anti-constitutional way in which the court overturned them. But beyond applause and lamentation, one must marvel at the role language played in the repeal, which seems to have owed its success less to judicial activism than to shifting semantics. Would the Supreme Court have invented this new right had sodomy remained the common term for homosexual acts? One cannot say for sure. But the homosexual appropriation of the rainbow and the term gay, respectively a symbol of hope and a synonym for happy, seems to have helped the rebranding campaign. Perhaps hardwired prejudices against homosexuality will recolor the rainbow. Regardless, few people, if any, expect or desire the return of sodomy laws anytime soon. We are left with the tension of translation. The new words transform our understanding of the old concept, but not entirely. And as the old concepts shine through again, the strength of the new words weakens, and the euphemism treadmill shifts to yet another word. So the radicals must constantly create new words to stave off this coloring and continue to shift public opinion in their desired direction. The euphemism treadmill underscores two other features of political correctness: irony and inconsistency. To continue with the previous example, consider the term queer, which dates back to the 16th century and originally meant strange. In the 19th century, the word became a slur for homosexuals, and this meaning persisted well into the 20th century. In 1968, the conservative journalist William F. Buckley Jr. memorably lost his temper and warned leftist public intellectual Gore Vidal, "Listen, you queer, stop calling me a crypto-Nazi, or I'll smash you in your goddamn face, and you'll stay plastered," much to the delight of Vidal, who at that point won the debate. Today, the slur that delighted Vidal delights the practitioner of political correctness for a different reason. By the late 20th century, homosexuals had appropriated the term for themselves and begun to use it with pride. But at the same time, the older, derogatory sense persisted, at least for some people. So universities can dedicate whole departments to queer studies. But when the conservative comedian Steven Crowder refers to a homosexual journalist who goes by the screen name Gay Wonk as a queer, YouTube cuts off his income. Political correctness holds that the meaning of words differs depending on who utters them, the clearest example of this phenomenon being the N-word. The N-word has two senses, one derogatory, hard R, another affectionate, soft R. Politeness has exorcised the former from common use. Political correctness has simultaneously encouraged and banned the latter use, depending on the identity of the speaker. Black people may use the term all they like, notably in rap music, and proponents of political correctness will cheer them on for appropriating and redefining a slur. But white people may not sing along to those rap songs, or the PC police will condemn them for racism. According to the enforcers of political correctness, the meaning of the word changes not with semantic context, but with the skin color of the speaker. But these dictators of diction ignore even this rule when convenience calls. In 2020, a recording of the liberal comedian Jimmy Kimmel using the N-word while impersonating the rapper Snoop Dogg resurfaced. Kimmel, who in the early 2000s had darkened his skin to impersonate Oprah Winfrey and the basketball player Karl Malone on his politically incorrect television program, The Man Show, faced no consequences. At some point between The Man Show and Jimmy Kimmel Live, the comedian had transformed his act to accord with political correctness. He had become the darling of liberal Hollywood and hosted the Emmys for the third time the very same year that his N-word tape leaked. Joy Behar, a liberal host at ABC, pulled out the proverbial shoe polish to dress as a beautiful African woman for a Halloween party in 1971. But her career survived the resurfacing of that scandal in 2019. Meanwhile, Megyn Kelly, a non-liberal host at NBC, lost her job over the mere suggestion that white fans of Diana Ross might darken their skin to resemble the singer for Halloween. The propriety of certain racial speech and dress depended not on race, but ideology. The rules did not set an equal standard, but instead served as an excuse for politically convenient censorship. While it may seem inconsistent, this cynical censorship, enforcing the rules only on some people, and even then only some of the time, follows from the radicals' political premises. If nature is fixed and objective, then the identity of a speaker cannot change the meaning of words, because the reality to which the words refer exists apart from the speaker. If nature is perfectible and evolves, the identity of a speaker can change the meaning of words, because there is nothing separate and enduring to which words refer. Woodrow Wilson, the most consciously progressive president in the history of the United States, explained the irreconcilable difference between these two political frameworks by way of scientific example. The founding fathers and framers of the Constitution, Wilson contended, established constitutional government because they lived under the sway of Isaac Newton, who believed that eternal and fixed laws governed nature. But now, Wilson explained, we live in the age of Charles Darwin, who has demonstrated that nature is never fixed, but always evolving, and therefore our politics must acknowledge this discovery, ditch the old fixed rules, and evolve. Under Newton, politics must acknowledge the imperfectibility of nature and strike a prudent balance of power. James Madison described this system and its logic in Federalist 51. What is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. Under Darwin, this separation of powers and system of checks and balances could only hamper progress, which requires a great concentration of energy if we hope to evolve. Conservatives err when they try to oppose political correctness by following or refuting its purported rules. As on the improv comedy program Whose Line Is It Anyway? The rules are made up and the points don't matter. All that matters for proponents of political correctness is the imposition of the rules. A phrase might carry one meaning one day and the opposite the next. The meaning of the term political correctness itself developed by just such an ironic reversal. According to Deborah Cameron, a feminist linguist who holds the Rupert Murdoch Professorship in Language and Communication at Oxford, how's that for irony? The terms politically correct and politically incorrect began as self-effacing inside jokes among leftists. They functioned on one hand to differentiate the new left from the orthodox old left, Cameron explains, and on the other, to satirize the ever-present tendency of politicos to become over-earnest, humorless, and rigidly prescriptive, poking fun at the notion that anyone could be, or would want to be, wholly correct. In Cameron's telling, the term was ironic from the beginning. Paul Berman, the liberal writer and historian of the 1960s radicals, disagrees. He believes that this self-effacing irony followed an initially earnest use of the term. Politically correct was originally an approving phrase on the Leninist left to denote someone who steadfastly towed the party line, he contends. Then it evolved into PC, an ironic phrase among wised-up leftists to denote someone whose line-towing fervor was too much to bear. Doctrinaire leftists who consciously identified with foreign political movements used the term sincerely, but their ardor repelled their lukewarm intellectual heirs, particularly in the West. Geoffrey Hughes, an historian of the English language, agrees. In the totalitarian context of its communist and Maoist origins, political correctness had a serious doctrinaire sense, he admits. Once it was borrowed into a democratic and liberal political milieu, it became an anomaly, an empty formula of conformity open to subversion. In other words, the intrinsically skeptical character of modern liberal democracy undermined the initial self-seriousness of political correctness. Totalitarians, for their many faults, tend to take ideas more seriously than liberals, who doubt the possibility of grasping absolute truth, and therefore leave politics largely to the whims of the people, rather than the integrity of ideas. For the liberal, 50 million Frenchmen can't be wrong. Sophie Tucker coined that phrase, which summed up the liberal view, in her hit 1927 song, contrasting gay Paris with more restrictive political regimes. When they put on a show and it's a hit, no one tries to censor it. 50 million Frenchmen can't be wrong. And when a book is selling at its best, it isn't stopped, it's not suppressed. 50 million Frenchmen can't be wrong. These lyrics took aim at the United States, which since its earliest days has been torn between liberal ideals and conservative practices, the Declaration of Independence and the Hays Code. In the end, Sophie Tucker got her way. America has liberalized a great deal since the 1920s. A laissez-faire attitude reigns even on the right, as shown by the prominence of libertarianism in conservative circles throughout the late 20th and early 21st centuries. During the early days of political correctness, restrictiveness pervaded the entire political landscape, albeit with different expressions on the right and on the left. The House Committee on Un-American Activities was neither liberal nor skeptical. It put forth a substantive moral vision of America and sought to smoke out commies wherever it could find them. William F. Buckley, Jr., the urbane father of the post-war conservative movement, published a book-length defense of Joe McCarthy in 1954. But in the decades that followed, even most conservatives disavowed the moral certitude that characterized that era in favor of skeptical liberalism. Irony and apathy tend to spread in skeptical liberal societies, as anyone who has ever witnessed the French shrug can attest. While at one time popular entertainment inspired us with grand performances of beauty and precision, now dressed-down, grotesque burlesques make a mockery of those traditional standards. Marilyn Monroe and Ella Fitzgerald fade. Lena Dunham and Miley Cyrus shine. The enthusiastic comedy of Bob Hope loses favor, and the cynical irony of David Letterman replaces it. Irony thrives in liberal and decadent societies because it permits the evasion of responsibility. One never need commit too much. The ironic utterance of a phrase or performance of an action allows one to conceal his true motives. He may mean what he says, or he may mean the opposite. In any case, no one can ever hold him to account. A meme arose in 2019 to describe the application of this deceptive strategy to politics. The irony bro, who evades criticism for his statements and actions by reciting the four-word incantation. It's called irony, bro. Urban Dictionary, an online encyclopedia of slang, defines the irony bro as someone who claims to enjoy something ironically or just for fun, while hiding the fact that they have genuine interest in the thing they claim to be enjoying ironically or mocking for the lols. It cites hipsters and internet edgelords as examples of the phenomenon. In Notes from the Underground, Fyodor Dostoevsky described irony as the last refuge of modest and chaste-souled people when the privacy of their soul is coarsely and intrusively invaded. Pride, he observes, causes people to hide their intentions behind sarcasm, a form of verbal irony. The Scottish philosopher Thomas Carlyle cast sarcasm in even darker terms. Sarcasm I now see to be, in general, the language of the devil, he confessed, for which reason I have long since as good as renounced it. Sarcasm, like the devil, only accuses. It offers nothing positive. Cultures on the rise know what they believe, and they possess the confidence to defend those beliefs. Decadent societies retreat into irony and criticism. Medieval Europe repelled invaders and set out under the cross of St. George to reconquer lost lands. Decadent modern Europe opens its borders to those same hostile powers because it lost its faith long ago and now detests its own past triumphs. Ironically, Mao's Little Red Book might have more directly influenced Western politics had decadence and irony not overtaken the radicals. Jeffrey Hughes observes the paradox that political correctness increased in vogue in America precisely when hardline communism was waning. But one should not wonder at the coincidence. Communism demands confidence. A communist insurrection in America would require revolutionaries to risk imprisonment, ostracism, and death. Political correctness better suits an exhausted and decadent society. Euphemisms and vagueness go down easier than manifestos in war, and the radicals can always deny their subversive intentions by claiming irony. But if the term political correctness arose as a tongue-in-cheek in-joke among leftists, what exactly was the punchline? If the new left of the 1960s sought to distinguish itself from the dogmatic old left, how precisely did they differ? The radicals of the 1960s may have used the term to mock their forebears' rigidity and humorlessness, but the new left fought just as earnestly as the old to design and enforce new codes of speech and behavior for society. The veneer of irony merely helped to mask their radical aims. They attacked traditional dogmas as repressive and therefore illegitimate. But then they treated the inversion of the old standards with precisely the same dogmatism. In the name of tolerance, the cultural revolutionaries toppled traditional standards and persecuted any who dared dissent. In the name of diversity, the radicals overthrew an old order and demanded adherence to the new one, ostracizing any who opposed them. Conservatives struggled to gain ground against the insurrection as left-wing irony bros constantly moved the goalposts. Heads they win, tails we lose. Conservatives need not rely on convoluted theories of conspiratorial cabals to account for political correctness. The importation of Mao's writings into a decadent and critical culture accounts for the fact just fine. But while the radical foot soldier of the 60s generation may have stumbled unwittingly into this political framework, it took a heftier mind to give coherence to this politics of irony. Herbert Marcuse of Frankfurt School fame supplied just that with his articulation in 1965 of repressive tolerance.
And that was Chapter 5, Mao Goes Mainstream, from the book Speechless by Michael Knowles. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Chapter 11 of The Management of the Absurd, called Listening is More Difficult Than Talking. When we genuinely listen to another person, we are able to enter a special world in which feelings are shared. That's a rare experience, rewarding for both parties. It yields so many positive consequences that teaching listening skills has become standard in the repertoire of management trainers. But if listening is so satisfying and effective, why don't we find more of it in the workplace? Why don't managers listen more? For many reasons. One important reason is that good listening is inordinately difficult, even for experienced listeners. It's unrealistic to expect people to learn it quickly or to do it easily. One need only go through the back and forth of trying to get another person to agree. Yes, that's what I really mean, to discover how difficult it is. We fail far more often than we succeed. In some situations, listening may even be inappropriate. Leaders at times need to ignore others, follow their own lights, tenaciously hold to a course of action. Genuinely listening to others' views needs not derail such action, but it could. Presidents Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, both excellent listeners, have both been faulted for spending too much time listening, trying to build consensus. In listening, managers may feel confined, having to focus entirely on what the other person means, how he or she sees the world. Ordinarily, human beings need more psychological space in which to move in their communication. Listening denies the listener that space. It's something like driving a car. We don't focus on the road all the time. That would be too confining. We look at the scenery, eat, drink, talk, sing, hug, kiss, play the radio. People fail to listen not just because they don't know how, but because they feel capable of so much more than the demands of listening permit. The obstacles encountered. Listening can also be a disturbing experience. All of us have strong needs to see the world in certain ways, and when we really listen so that we understand the other person's perspective, we risk being changed ourselves. Similarly, listening to others means having to be alert to one's own decisiveness, to one's impulse to want to change, defensiveness. Let's try that again. Similarly, listening to others means having to be alert to one's own defensiveness, to one's impulse to want to change others. That requires a level of self-awareness, even self-criticism, that is often not easy to endure. Listening demands openness, trust, and respect, qualities difficult to maintain and seldom exhibited in any uniform way, even by the most experienced listeners. It is more an attitude than a skill. The best kind of listening comes not from technique, but from being genuinely interested in what really matters to the other person. Listening is much more than patiently hearing people out. For managers, listening poses a special dilemma. Research tells us that people are more likely to change when we reverse the flow of communication. That is, when people are not talked at, but when they themselves have a chance to talk. Yet the popular view persists that our leaders must be great communicators, inspiring and succeeding because of their speaking ability, not their listening ability. It can be difficult for managers to reconcile those competing requirements. Finally, it has been thought that listening would be contagious, that those who were listened to sensitively would gain the ability to listen to others in the same way. Unfortunately, that's probably not what actually happens. The listening model does not seem to spread in the way one might hope. Or if it does, it is in small measure. Not the stuff of manipulation. A booklet Carl Rogers and I wrote in 1955 introduced the phrase active listening into the lexicon of management and human relations training. Even though I pretty much agree with what we said then, I would not write such a piece today. The main reason is that I no longer believe that genuine listening should be reduced to a technique. To me, there's something graceless and manipulative in analyzing those special moments when we are enriched and exhilarated by someone's listening to us, or being honest with us, or praising us and teaching them as human relations or management skills. It is like learning memory tricks so that you can call someone you barely know by name, or using self-disclosure as a method of gaining someone's confidence. Unfortunately, the entire range of human emotional response has become fair game for the management technologists. And that was chapter 11, Listening is More Difficult Than Talking. And next week will be chapter 12, Praising People Does Not Motivate Them. Back in a minute. Thank you. The following is one of my voiceover demos. If you're a voiceover artist and you would like to advertise one of your demos on my podcast, please send an MP3 to thedrill12, all one word, at gmail.com. That's thedrill12 at gmail.com. Back in a minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Caesar's Palace for 12 rounds of boxing. In the red corner, from Los Angeles, California, wearing the red trunks with the gold trim, weighing in at 125 pounds, the lightweight champion of the world, Danny Little Red Lopez. Well, Bill, our winners get a home theater receiver. That's right. Experience the full potential of high-definition video with this 72-channel digital home theater receiver from Yamaha. But wait, that's not all. They also get a 5.1-channel surround sound system from Mirage. With 5 palm-sized speakers and a compact subwoofer cube, the MX 5.1 brings you huge immersive sound with Mirage's omnipolar technology. All from the Spiegel catalog, Chicago, Illinois, 60609. And they're taking closer order as down the stretch they come. Mr. Hot Stuff has 3 lengths to make up with chocolate candy last. On the rail, take the points behind that gallant son with chocolate candy gaining on the outside. In the lead is Pioneer of the Nile being tackled by chocolate candy. They're neck and neck as they come to the wire. And Pioneer of the Nile holds off chocolate candy and wins the Santa Anita Derby. And now, on your feet, time to greet holder of 14 NBA titles, your home team, your Los Angeles Lakers. Number 3 at 6'8", 5th year out of UCLA, playing forward, Trevor Ariza. Starting at center, number 17 at 7 feet, 4th year out of St. Andrews High School, Andrew Bynum. And at guard, number 24, 6'6", 13th season out of Loyal Marion High School, Kobe Bryant.
Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.